Welcome to this edition of Simsbury School News. My name is Dominique Avery. Today we're going to talk about Henry James Memorial School, the town of Simsbury's only middle school where approximately 700 or so children attend grades 7 and 8. We're not going to talk about curriculum or programs today. Today we're going to talk about the building. Henry James was built 60 years ago in 1957. And lots of things have changed in education since then, and the local school officials have been working on some major improvements to the building. My guests today are Matt Curtis, Superintendent of Schools, and Brian White, who is the Henry James principal. Welcome back to both of you. You've both been here before.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
Matt, so I want to start with you. If I recall correctly, the latest changes to Henry James have been on the capital budget referendum, have been up for capital budget referendum twice in the last few years, right?
Yeah.
Phase 1, which is done, that was sort of security office changes.
Yep.
We talked about that here.
Sure.
And Phase 2, I think, was approved last year in the referendum.
Yeah.
And it's going to be worked on this summer. And now you're preparing Phase 3, which is sort of what we're going to talk about today. But before we begin, maybe you could just sort of just talk a little bit about the two phases.
Yeah. As you said, Phase 2, Phase 1 rather, was a couple years ago. And that was a security project tied in also with some basic, I guess I would say, freshening up of what hadn't been touched since 1957. And the building's instructional spaces have been largely untouched since that time. So we relocated the front office, which was great for security purposes. We now have a much better flow of traffic into the building. We also redid flooring, ceilings, lockers,
and it looks
paint, a reconfiguration of, as I said, of the entire front office, and it just is brighter and feels much more welcoming, which is really important. Phase 2 will be similar in that sense. It has some more of the fire suppression work that needs to be done, but we'll essentially have the general hallways and corridors match the appearance that you have now in Phase 1. Doesn't touch the instructional spaces except for some reconfiguration down in the tech ed wing, which is really, I mean, it gets complicated, tied to the Phase 3 proposal, because we'll need some kind of swing space if that does pass at referendum, because it's a much more large-scale project.
That's a fairly low-cost project, right? I mean, in terms of...
I don't have the exact figure, about $2 million?
$2 million?
Yeah.
And are you confident? I actually watched the the State Board of Ed, or no, the State School Priority Construction List Committee the other day, and saw that they're not giving final approval right away. So I was sort of wondering, are you convinced that you will get the money for that?
As much as you can be in the current climate. Burke, our business manager, Burke LeClaire, just attended a meeting. We are on the priority list. So we have to proceed as if we will be getting the reimbursement money, haven't been told otherwise, and feel relatively good about it. I mean, there is a lot of uncertainty at the state right now, and I think we just have to be poised to react to that.
So this is very inside baseball, but I've watched a lot of those priority school construction meetings, and those meetings have always been totally pro forma. They have just passed everything through. Those were years ago, and now it was actual discussion about, everything has changed. The money picture has changed totally.
Yeah.
Okay. Brian, you're here. Let's talk a little bit about, you've been taking this sort of show on the road. You've been talking to the Board of Finance. I know you've talked to the Board of Selectmen. You talked to the Board of Education about the project. So now you have an opportunity in a more intimate setting to talk to the people of Simsbury about what's in this project. And this one is going to be a bit bigger than $2 million. So we'll talk about cost later. So what's in it? What's the major things that are in it?
Sure. Well, the major components for Phase 3 are inclusive of a new library media center, new science classroom facilities, and an auditorium. I mean, those are really the largest components of Phase 3, with additional improvements to classroom spaces as well. And so this is really a project that will transform our middle school into a much more modern facility, and a facility that's really comparable to the middle schools in surrounding communities.
So talk a little bit about this library media center. Why is that necessary?
Sure. So from the most practical concern is the fact that we have very limited space with our current facility. And so it's hard to imagine in a school of 700 students that we can hardly accommodate a single class of students in our current media center. And that's just because when it was built, again, over 60 years ago, or approximately 60 years ago, as we've mentioned, those were the needs of the time. And so since then, the way in which schools operate is very different. Our needs are very different, and that's something that we need to improve upon.
So explain a little bit, because a lot of the people who watch us are my generation, and we went to school in those years, and Media Center, there was no Media Center. The library was a place where you went with your class. There were 25 kids in it, and you went and you had some sort of program go on there. How is it used now?
Sure. Well, I mean, Henry James is a middle school, and so modern middle schools operate using a team concept. We emphasize interdisciplinary instruction, where students are doing more hands-on learning, more project-based learning, and so that requires a space that's conducive to that approach to teaching and learning. So just needing a space that can accommodate more than one class at a time, larger numbers of students, where students can go and research and work collaboratively on their assignments is what we're looking to create.
So when you say Media Center, that means there's more than just books there, right?
Oh, sure. So really, not just books, but also technology, and that's something we've had to be very thoughtful about, not only considering the current needs of our school, but thinking down the road. We have this opportunity to improve our facility. We want to make sure that what we create doesn't just satisfy our current need, but can also grow in time as our needs change.
You know, it's interesting. Several of our elementary schools, Squadron Line in particular, Tooten Hills, really have great library and media centers. The reality is Henry James never had one. It's 2 classrooms. That they knock down the wall, and essentially you have a long, narrow space, as Brian said, where you can't even bring in 25 students to work on a particular project.
And because you have a team concept that you want to bring, you often probably want to bring in a team or a part of a team.
That's right.
Correct.
That's right.
Okay, so now the other big nut and big change, and I guess expansion part of it, would be the auditorium. Why does Henry James need an auditorium?
Sure. So in the day-to-day, we have a music program that currently supports 700 students. And so at Henry James, all students participate in the music program. We're recognized both regionally and nationally as having a premier music program and performing arts program. It's something we're exceptionally proud of. It's hard to believe that to have a program of the caliber that we do, that we wouldn't have a performance venue or even an instructional space that can accommodate the needs of the program. And so in terms of daily usage, this facility would essentially be an instructional space for our various music programs. It would certainly provide us with a performance venue for all performing arts and music. It's also a space in which we can congregate as a school, which we don't currently have. So we talked about accommodating our teams. This would provide us with a space where teams could come together for large group programming, things like guest speakers, etc.
As I recall, when my daughter was at Henry James, those kinds of things were in the gym, right?
They still are.
They still are. and
Some of the larger performances you've taken
to
the high school.
Well, that's
just,
right.
Right. So the plays were at the high school.
And there's an
right.
inherent scheduling conflict there just because of the demand on the high school space from both high school programming, and community has a desire to use that space quite frequently too. So providing the community with another opportunity for a large space for different venues, I think would be advantageous as well.
I noticed that someone on the Board of Finance said, well, why don't you use Eno? And I was amused by that. So why don't you use Eno?
So a good example, so Mr. Curtis referenced, the need to utilize the high school space. We currently run 2 performances for our choral concerts every year, and that's because even in a space of 1,000, we fill capacity. And that speaks to the size of the program. So the other aspect is really giving our kids a performance venue that's acoustically sound. I spoke about the caliber of the performance. I'm sure many of the folks at home watching have either attended our musical productions, our concerts. It's remarkable how high performing our music program is. And so what the high school currently affords us is a space that is really acoustically appropriate given the level of performance that our kids are at.
So, and that's what you would like to construct. Where would that auditorium be on the school?
So for people at home that are familiar with Henry James, it would be adjacent to our current music classrooms. So if you were to pull into our rear driveway, that's essentially where it would be placed as you enter into the rear parking lot on that end of the building.
So, okay, I have very bad spatial sense. So there's the fields, and then... So is it near...
Closer to Firetown Road.
Closer to Firetown.
Closer to Firetown Road.
So in relationship to the adult that wing, that new wing? the
That's right.
adult
It
education?
would be adjacent to our DCE program.
Okay. So that was, I didn't mention that earlier, but that was a major renovation that was done to Henry James a few years ago.
Yeah, that's
right?
the
2000.
2000. So you had the art classrooms, which are really fantastic instructional spaces. I was in there today, and the continuing ed portion of our programming.
So the other thing I noticed in doing a little bit of research about the project is that there is a classroom or science classroom modernization component to this. What is that all about?
Sure. So we've referred to that as our CLAB concept, and that really is just a classroom lab design where you have an instructional space that can accommodate a more traditional classroom setting, but also have a lab built in. One of the things we've talked a lot about as we've thought about the programmatic needs surrounding this project is the concept of STEM. And so when we talk about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, increasingly that's the direction we're in as a school, and that's the trend in education at large. It's interdisciplinary by design, and so that's something that we feel is conducive to what we do at the middle school. It also emphasizes increasingly skills associated with engineering. So the lab spaces we would look to create would accommodate engineering and science.
So as you've been presenting this, you've done it a number of times, what kind of pushback are you getting? I've mentioned a couple of things that the Board of Finance asked about. This is 22 million or so?
Yeah, 22.8. I think,
Almost
for me,
23.
Dominique, is a lot of questions about cost and how the cost impacts taxpayers, and I think a really important thing to both recognize and give the Board of Finance credit for is, and you were with the Board of Education, they've set structures over time in terms of their debt limits and the parameters they work with us on to really control the amount of dollars that are approved on an annual basis, the amount of money that goes out for bonding, and it all needs to fit within what we kind of call a 7% threshold. And if it does that, it really minimizes the tax impact. It's not as if in some communities you go out for a major construction project and that project and the cost of that project and bonding is lumped right on top of everything else that's going on. So our challenge has been to work collaboratively with Lisa Hevner and her list of projects to make sure that our $22.8 million fits within the desired parameters that the Board of Finance has laid out. And we feel pretty confident we can do that. I mean, I think we have to have some dialogue on, not to get too technical, but the duration of bonds. They prefer to bond a 10-year period. And for larger projects, like the high school, historically they've bonded 15 years. So we feel if we can work towards that 15-year bond with the collaboration with Lisa in projects, and we've moved other things out and reprioritized. And so as Lisa, we can present a financial package that fits the parameters of the Board of Finance. And I think that's really important for people to understand.
So this will be up for referendum this May?
If it gets approved.
If it gets approved
correct.
by the Board of Finance?
Correct.
Okay, so people could be voting for it. So I understand that the state will not even consider it unless it's passed in a referendum from the town. So what portion of this could the state possibly fund, and is that an issue these days?
I think that's up for conversation. I don't have the exact dollars. I should have that figure for you. I don't know the reimbursable dollars. Do you, Brian?
But I know it has to do with new and old construction and
it
renovation.
does. Yeah, it does. I know that we always use a conservative figure there, and I believe that the Board of Finance, similar to your thinking, is asking us to analyze what would the burden of cost be even if something had happened to that reimbursement rate. So I think with the challenges that are going on in the state, it's prudent for us to look at all those options. I don't know if it's 20% of the project or 15%. I'm unsure the exact amount that's reimbursable.
So let's say the state wouldn't reimburse and it gets turned down. So, I mean, is there a way of scaling this back? Or, I mean, would Simsbury, would people stop moving here because the middle school was so bad? Or?
I don't know that it would be that drastic, but the reality is, facilities are an important part of what we do in creating. We talk about creating great places to learn and great places to work, and that has really become a dilapidated facility. I think we over the past 3 or 4 years have done a really nice job with some relatively small dollars in kind of shining up our buildings and making them more inviting. We have a challenge in the future, I think, at Latimer Lane School that's been largely untouched as well. So I think it's important to keep up with those things. Could you scale things back? I mean, if there were different challenges financially, we could certainly look at things differently. And how we prioritize those, I think, would be conversation with the Board of Ed. I wouldn't want to sit here today and make those kind of decisions by myself. But certainly we know that we've packaged this to maximize the reimbursable dollars. So, for example, if you took the auditorium out of the scope, there'd never be an opportunity to have an auditorium again because it wouldn't be tied to some of this fire suppression work and some of the other dollars that are reimbursable.
So some of the stuff is totally, so the fire, we didn't talk about that.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant part of the project as well.
Can you just review
you want to talk about that a little
quickly, because we skated over that.
Well, sure. So as Mr. Curtis mentioned, we've been working through different phases at the school, and one of the things that's been a portion of previous phases was to improve the fire suppression in the building. There's some additional fire suppression work that's proposed or will occur as part of Phase 2 this summer, but there's some additional work that's proposed as part of Phase 3 as well. And so our goal has been, as we've been able to move through each phase of construction, just to make sure that that aspect of the building is what it needs to be.
So it could be better, but it's still safe, right?
Still safe, but continuing to make it better.
So one thing I also skipped over as I was recalling that all this stuff was done in the gym and it wasn't that great. You're having trouble just getting kids into getting the gym space to use, right?
Well, in terms of our gymnasium,
they use it for the gym. So I'm talking about for
if you wanted to use it as an instructional.
Oh, sure. So that is the one space where we can accommodate a large number of students. So presently we can't really do that anywhere else in our building. And so one of the things that often occurs, because our gymnasiums are, after all, instructional spaces, they're used throughout the day, there's very limited opportunity to pull the school together into that space without disrupting the overall schedule in the overall school day.
So I guess we need to talk about money, because it's a very different time now than it was. I think I mentioned the school priority construction list used to go through without anything, but there's just not that much money. There's just an incredibly tight state and local fiscal climate right now. I read this morning, I don't know which news source it was, but I read that in Bridgeport they've had to cancel after-school programs because they can't afford the school resource officers, and so kids have been cast in play, and then it's all canceled. And in Hartford, they have so little funding that when a teacher left, they couldn't afford to hire her, and so now they're moving kids from one school to another. Right. And those are just awful situations for those children. And we offer so much in our schools. We're known for having an excellent system, but we are facing a really difficult climate, and the governor is going to introduce his budget tomorrow. We're taping this on February 7th, so we'll know much more after tomorrow, but just can we speculate a little bit? There is a possibility that we will lose substantial funding, right?
I think there is. There have been indications, particularly on the we call it the Educational Cost Share grant, which we receive about $6 million. Dollars go to the town as a revenue resource. And taking another look at how that is funded to funnel more money to urban areas and areas of poverty. So we do know that there's not a larger bucket of money. We do know that the governor has talked about looking at communities that have a relatively high wealth index, which we would fall into. So I think it stands to reason that we could certainly be challenged by that. And we have some other local challenges in the current year as well on the tax-based side, with the Hartford leaving and the building being taken down, and while new development is going to come in, the grand list growth hasn't caught up yet.
Right.
So we have some local challenges that kind of potentially exacerbate our tax rate as well that we need to be cognizant of. One thing I will say on the positive front is we had a really productive three-board meeting back in November that put these parameters out. We've done some long-range planning and looked at some fixed costs. We recognize this is not a year like the last 3 years where we had a goal to say we will have a flat mill rate. It's just not reasonable at this point because we would be impacting program to such an extent. And that's one thing collectively I think we're fortunate. All the different boards are proud of the school systems. They don't want to impact programs in a negative way. But if we get hit with a significant multi-million-dollar cut to our aid, we certainly know we are going to be back at the table talking to each other about what this could possibly look like. And those are conversations we haven't had to have here in Simsbury. We've been fortunate to avoid. I mean, we are doing things in the current year we haven't done in past years in terms of employing a soft freeze, really making sure the things that we need to purchase and equipment or supplies are musts in an effort to free up potential dollars for next year. But those type of moves help you move a couple $100,000. They don't help you move millions.
All right, so if we face a major cut, clearly the governor said at a news conference earlier this week before his budget address that some communities are going to come out ahead and then others are going to lose ground, and we are most certainly going to be probably in that. We're not as rich as Fairfield County towns, but we certainly have more than Hartford and Bridgeport.
Right.
The governor said we're not failing wealthy people in our state, we're failing poor people in our state, so he intends to change it. Do you think the town is going to continue to support the level of education we have, or do you think, as in other towns, maybe 15 years ago, there was, a group of taxpayers who said we don't want taxes increased, we want school budgets cut, and we want programs cut?
Yeah.
What's your sense of the community?
I think I hate to say we need to wait a little bit to see what the magnitude of any reductions would be. I think the town and the boards will always support education in this community. I think we've had such a great reputation. I think it's one of the reasons the community thrives and continues to thrive. So I think there'd be every effort to recognize that. But the reality is, with a mill rate like we have here in Simsbury, we'd have to look for measures to control it because everybody has their limits, and I think there could be some real challenges there.
So now, one thing we didn't talk about was the governor also has a plan to shift $400 million in teacher pension costs onto municipalities. So there's another. I can't even imagine how is that going to happen. And I guess maybe this is sort of unfair, but a lot of people don't know that teachers don't pay into Social Security. Right?
Correct. So they pay roughly 7% of their wages towards their pension, do not pay into Social Security, so would not get a Social Security benefit. It's a plan that's always sat with the state. So that's just a huge fundamental shift. It seems in his initial conversations and press releases that it appears these things are wrapped together in some sense, that the educational cost share grant and the pension proposal, as well with special education funding, are somehow all wrapped into a new formula. So it's really hard to speculate what that would look like. On its own, the 10% contribution would be over $3 million, which, as you can guess, would be,
right,
catastrophic in a sense to try to find $3 million.
So what do we get from the state now?
About $6 million.
$6 million.
Yeah. So it's interesting. The two key pieces in the current equation are your wealth index, but they're also your ability to generate tax revenue outside of homes, which we do not have a great ability to generate that revenue, which is why we receive more dollars than a community like Avon or Farmington. So I'm unsure of how all that will work into a new equation.
And if he changes, I think what he said was he's going to be, I don't know how he's going to judge the wealth of the community. He did say he was going to judge the poverty by another measure which has now escaped me, so I can't remember what it was he
Right.
said. But in any case, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to discuss it too thoroughly because he's going to announce it tomorrow. This will air after that.
Yes.
And Matt, you have promised me that you'll come back
I
next
sure will.
month and we'll talk about the
We'll
budget
have a lot
in
to
more
talk
detail.
about for sure.
We have just a couple of minutes left. Brian, I want to give you a chance to wrap up your pitch to the town for this project. What do you want them to take away from this program about Henry James?
Sure. Well, I mean, we're so fortunate in this community to have an outstanding middle school. It's something I'm exceptionally proud of as the principal. I'm proud of our middle school as a community member. Every year I have the opportunity to really celebrate our strong track record of academic achievement. As Mr. Curtis pointed out, I mean, we have a town that really values its schools. And so I get excited when I think about creating a facility at Henry James that is equally competitive with the towns that we frequently compare ourselves to on the academic front. The opportunity to take a building that was conceived of in 1957 as a high school and really transform it into a modern middle school that really meets our present and future needs.
So I meant to ask you earlier, you have a new assistant principal.
We do.
I actually interviewed her here. How is that going, and how is she fitting in?
Sure. So this year, of course, Mrs. Anjanette Belmonte, we hired as our new assistant principal. She's doing a great job. We're lucky to have her. Mrs. Belmonte, as you probably remember, has worked at Henry James for about 10 years,
Right.
and so was already a valued member of our staff and our school community, and is really doing outstanding work as our new assistant principal.
So just for personal, because I get to meet all these new hires, I
Yep.
think you and the board have done a great job with hiring, because I'm always so impressed by people.
Thank you very much.
So we've actually run out of time. I'd like to thank everyone here at SCTV behind the scenes for their help in getting this show on the air. I'd like to thank our camera volunteers this time, Jim Dempsey and Sam Davidson, and our director today, who is Kristen Benedict. Thank you, Kristen. I'm sure you're doing an excellent job in there. Thanks especially to my guests, Matt Curtis and Brian White. And thank you, of course, for joining us. A reminder, thanks to SCTV volunteers, you can see all Board of Education meetings on the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month live on Xfinity Channel 95 and Frontier 99, and of course, always online. If you missed any part of this show, you can find it anytime at simsburytv.org. I'm Dominique Avery. See you next time for Simsbury School News, when we'll talk about the budget and what the state budget and what its implication is for Simsbury. Thank you. Since 1984, SCTV has been the place to turn in Simsbury to watch local government in action. But we're more than local government and school meetings. SCTV is the only place where you can check out all the candidates in local elections. We have high school sports and exercise classes. Other shows keep you up on health, finance, poetry, music, and Simsbury hot topics. Now we need your help. Simsbury Community TV is embarking on a major capital fundraising campaign to bring SCTV into the 21st century. We've received a generous grant from the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, but now we must match it. We want everyone to watch us on TV or on our website, but even if you never do, please help so that we can continue to keep your government open and you informed. Someday, when there's a crisis, you will want SCTV to be there.
Hi, my name is Lori Lubetkin. I'm co-owner of the Redstone Pub in Simsbury. I hope you'll join me in supporting SCTV. Since 1984, your connection to your town, your schools, and your government.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.